I'm Mohammad from Tuple, and I'm very happy to present our recent project, Raha, which is a configuration-free error detection system. Before that, let me indicate that this project was a collaboration between Tuple, MIT, and QCRI. Error detection is a very important problem in data cleaning. Given a data set like that, the goal is to detect data values that are wrong. So here, our example is very small and easy, and you can easily identify these four values as the dirty values, because, for example, the capital of Spain is Madrid. But in real world, we have large and dirty data sets like this one, and the question is, how can we make this data set great again? So one way to do this task would be asking a domain expert. So in this naive approach, we ask a domain expert to evaluate our data set and identify the dirty values. But as you can imagine, this task would be tedious, and it is not scalable for large data sets. So that's why in this project, the main motivation of, the main goal of our system is to reduce the human involvement. So there are also other approaches to detect data errors. Traditionally, there are a lot of algorithms that can detect data errors for us. For example, here we have one rule violation detection algorithms. These kind of algorithms usually take a data set and a set of configuration as input. For example, for our rule violation detection algorithm, the configuration could be a data constraint, such as this functional dependency. And then this algorithm can mark some data values inside our data set as dirty values. And there are also other algorithms. For example, we can have outlier detection algorithms that can take statistical parameters, and we can have pattern violation detectors that take some pattern in forms of regular expressions. And we can also have knowledge-based violation detection algorithms that usually work with knowledge bases and detect data values that violating these entity relationships. So one question is, if we have such a nice algorithms, why the error detection problem is still challenging? The reason is that because we still have two important challenges. The first challenge is algorithm selection. So, okay, we have these algorithms, but which of these algorithms should be run on our data set? If you say, okay, only run one of these algorithms, then we will have a poor recall, because each algorithm is usually expert to detect only one kind of data errors. And if you say run all of the algorithms, then we will have poor precision, because not all of these algorithms are always a good choice for our data set. The second challenge is algorithm configuration. Even if we know that which algorithm is best for our data set, we still need to configure this algorithm. For example, for an outlier detection algorithm, we have to provide some parameters, some statistical parameters for our algorithm. So these are two challenges that we basically want to address in this paper. So we basically, to address these challenges, we basically formalize our problem as a classification task. Given a data set like that, our goal is to train a classification model per data column. We do it per data column because data values are comparable inside their domain. So the goal is using these classifiers later to predict the labels of data values. We want to predict, for example, here the Berlin is the correct value, but 1, 2, 3 is not a correct capital in our data set. So as you can imagine, we have to address two important research questions here. So we first need to featureize our data values, because the classifier can only understand features, not the values. And also, we need to develop a sampling approach, because the classifier needs some data cells in our data set to be labeled by the user. So let's first start with featureization. So a very intuitive solution for featureizing the data values is to use basically the traditional algorithms. We can use these algorithms because these algorithms are supposed to detect data errors. So basically, we can run these algorithms in our data set. Whenever they mark a data value, we can assume that we have one value 1 inside the feature vector of that value, and whenever they do not mark this value, we can add 1, 0 in the feature vector of the value. For example, here you can see that our value Berlin has 1 as the first element because this algorithm probably outputted this data cell, and the second algorithm did not output this cell, and we have a 0 inside the feature vector of this value. So, but if you remember, I told you that configuration of these algorithms is challenging. So the question is, okay, if we want to run these algorithms, how should we configure these algorithms? So we basically use a principle and wide range of configuration for these algorithms. So basically, we run each algorithm with different configurations. So let's look at this process. So let's say we have different algorithms. Here, for example, we can see 2 algorithms, and each algorithm can take several configurations. So first of all, we define one error detection strategy as a combination of one algorithm and one configuration. So basically, we will have number of algorithms times number of configurations, error detection strategies. Let's look at some examples for these kind of strategies. For example, here you can see three strategies. The first strategy, for example, is an outlier detection strategy. It says, does the value appear less than 2 times? Here, 2 times is a configuration, is a parameter. It can be 3 times, it can be 4 times. And also we have another strategy, which is the second strategy, which is a pattern violation strategy. If the value is non-alphabetical, again, the non-alphabetical is a configuration. It could be, is the value numerical or any other kind of patterns. And the last one, for example, is a rule violation detection strategy, because it basically says, is the data cell violate one functional dependency, which is a rule, which is an input configuration. So based on these strategies, when we run these strategies in our data set, we will have the output for different cells. For example, here, the first strategy outputs those values that appeared less than 2 times in our data set. So as you can see, these 4 values are outputted with this basically a strategy. So as you can see here, not all of these strategies are completely accurate, but it doesn't matter for us. As long as these strategies work with the same logic, they still give us some similarity features to compare data cells with each other. So then by concatenating the output of different strategies, we can create a feature vector for each data set. And since we use all the algorithms with a wide range of configuration, we will have a very expressive feature vector for representing the data sets. So in practice, we will have thousands of features for each data cell, basically. So that was about featureization. So the next challenge, as I told you, we need to sample some data cells to be labeled by the user because we want to train some classifiers. So a very basic approach could be just randomly sample some data cells in our from our data set. This approach works, but it's inefficient because each given user label gives us one data point in our training set. So a more interesting question is that, can we have more than one training data points by any given user label? And the answer to this question is yes, we can do that. Based on cluster assumption from machine learning, we can assume that 2 data points are going to have the same class label if they are inside one cluster. So that's why we basically cluster the data cells in each column based on the expressive feature representation that they have. So let's review this process on our simple example. So remember, we featureize our data cells in our table. So for sampling some data cells, we first cluster these data cells inside our column. So here we have 3 clusters, green, blue, and red. So then we ask the user to label one data value per cluster. So let's say user label the first value, Berlin, as clean, and the value 1, 2, 3 as dirty. So then we can have user label for these 2 values, of course. But that's the good thing, is that we can also propagate the user label through the cluster and have some noisy labels. So this approach basically boosts the number of training set that we have, because here the clusters are small, but in a large data set, when we have a large, bigger clusters, one user label gives us many more training data by this label propagation approach. And you may also ask, so what about the second cluster? We don't have any label for that. So that would be a straightforward. We have a cluster of clean values, we have a cluster of dirty values, and we just need to train a classification model to predict the labels of the last cluster. So we cluster each data values inside each column. So maybe you want to ask, so with how many clusters? So one parameter is here, the number of clusters per column. Since we want to do it completely configuration free, we don't want to ask user to provide the number of clusters. We use hierarchical clustering models, and we start with 2 clusters per data column. And in each iteration, we draw one tuple that covers that covers as many unlabeled clusters as possible in different data columns, and we ask user to label the values inside this tuple, and in the next iteration we add 1 cluster to each data column, and we continue this iterative process until the user labeling budget allows. So far, as you notice, we try to optimize the effectiveness of our solution, and also optimize, which means minimizing user involvement. So that may raise this question, that how good your efficiency would be, because we are running a lot of error detection algorithms and configurations. So to also try to optimize the efficiency, we also provide one optional step in our system that is supposed to optimize basically the runtime. So as you remember, we run all the algorithms and all the configurations that we have, and this could be time consuming, because we may have thousands of features, thousands of algorithms and configuration. The goal of this step is to basically filter some of these algorithms and configurations that are not going to be promising for us. To do that, basically we use historical data set. So we assume that if user have such a historical data set, if user has some data set that are already cleaned, so we can basically compare our new dirty data set with the previously clean data set, and then only run those error detection strategies on the new data set that had good performances beforehand on the previous data sets. So we evaluated our error detection system on 8 mostly real-world data sets, and we also these data sets are well-known data set in the community, and we also have 7 baselines. So as you can see here, we have recent error detection systems as our baselines. And we also use the typical evaluation measures, precision recall, F1 score that combines these 2 measures, and also runtime and number of labeled tuples. And we also have more than 10 experiments on different aspects of our solution. But here, because of the time limitation, let me just show you 2 charts. The first chart on the left shows the performance of Raha against a standalone error detection system. These standalone error detection systems are actually error detection algorithms that can work by their own. And on the right-hand side, you can see comparison of Raha to aggregator error detection system. These aggregator tools basically aggregate the output of different standalone error detection tools. So as you can see, Raha quickly converts and outperforms all the other baselines. And as you can see, Raha quickly converts with around 20 label tuples. And the reason is because of the magic is because of 2 things. The first thing is our expressive feature representation. And the second thing is basically our clustering-based sampling approach and label propagation. So traditional error detection is hard, so we want to avoid those kind of algorithms because we have to provide rules, parameters, and we have to provide a lot of training data for them. So that's, so Raha relieves the user from the tedious task of configuration algorithms, and also Raha needs a very, very fewer number of training data. And Raha can, only with around 20 label tuple, Raha can outperform any other baselines that we had in our experiments. So with that, I would like to thank my co-authors and our student, Jeremy. And I would like to encourage you to check out our paper and also our published, our open source tool. And I also encourage you to tweet your feedback for us with #Raha. Thank you.